So very pleased to welcome Chris Gooch, who is in this webinar all the way from Australia. So thank you for making time during your evening to present your view and what you do with regards to dealing with uncertainty in communication. So Chris Gooch is a senior flood project officer at the New South Wales Department of Planning and Environment. He has spent the last 12 years developing and running flood warning services in Australia and the UK. And Chris has led many floodplain management projects using his skills in project management, environmental monitoring, and stakeholder and community engagement. And he's delivered many fit-for-purpose outcomes, and we're very pleased to have him here and to let him present. Chris, I will make you presenter now.
Thanks for the introduction, Yuri. Look, I think my presentation today is going to focus around the last sort of 6 years I've been working at the City of Parramatta Council, rather than my current job, where I was developing and running Flood Smart Parramatta, the flash flood warning service. So a shout out to Royal Haskell, DHV, and Nelen Schuurmans for their amazing technical work to deliver on that project and to continue to support it. Look, I also want to say thank you to Alan, Jan, and Just, not only for really great presentations, really detailed, but for being those really clever people that do all the things that I can't do to make the systems that I want to make work, in terms of the modelling and the forecasting and all that development work. So that's great. I say my presentation doesn't have any equations in it, mainly because I don't really know any. So hopefully this is but still going to keep you interested and make you have a little think about the systems you're developing and how you can think about the customers that use them. So managing uncertainty, we're going to look here today at a total flood warning service example of Flood Smart Parramatta. Total flood warning service is an Australian term, which basically means that the forecasting system, the flood warning system, does everything from gauge data to prediction, interpretation, message construction, sending those messages out so people take action, reviewing the system, community engagement, and stakeholder engagement. So look, everyone gets uncertain. I think that's kind of the key point for this presentation. Is about understanding your customers' types of uncertainty, what they're worried about. And this little guy probably looks like he's uncertain about the size of these Wellington boots and what's going to happen next to him. So once we sort of understand that, then we can try and help people. I think we're quite lucky in flood forecasting and warning that we've actually got some fairly defined customers with, I'd like to think, fairly well documented uncertainty that we're trying to manage. Although every instance of a flood warning system, a flood forecasting system, is going to have its own individual elements that need to be considered. So we've got hydrologists and modelers. We've talked a lot about that today and how getting that data right and how we come to that correct, that best guess data underpins all the work that everyone down the chain does, because it's really important. But then we've also got council CEOs, we've got emergency planners and managers. Those sorts of people need to understand, what kind of severity is that flood going to be? Not necessarily in exact depth, but what's the severity type, and to really get that situational awareness of what's going on and where, so that they can take the right plans off the shelf and start enacting those procedures and plans, emergency plans. Then we've got emergency responders. These guys want to know, look, where do we need to get people on the ground? What sort of risk are we facing? Are we going to need to evacuate people? Do we need special equipment? That more localized information about what the flood's going to bring. And then finally, hopefully the most important people at the end of the day are the residents and the communities. They've probably got the highest level of uncertainty. Look, is this flood going to impact me? Am I at risk? Is my life at risk, my property? What sort of actions do I need to take? So I'm going to talk about how we considered those customers through the development of our flood warning service, but also as we review it, trying to keep that in mind. So Flood Smart Parramatta is going to be the example we're going to talk about today. I'm going to do a little bit of an history and an overview of what the system is, and then look at the elements and some examples of where we made changes and tweaks to the system to reduce uncertainty and help our customers. So this system was developed from 2016. It went live in 2018, and since then has dealt with a number of floods, which have allowed us to review the system, make improvements, and get us feedback. It's a flash flood warning service, which means that the flooding happens within 6 hours. That's an Australian term. But in some instances, in a lot of instances, that the actual impacts can happen in less than 6 hours from the rainfall. So City of Parramatta has this flash flooding risk in it. It means that we've got deep, fast flowing, high hazard flood water coming through the city, and sometimes flooding areas that you might not expect with overland flow routes, causing that real increased risk to life, let alone just the property that's going to get flooded as well. Parramatta is a highly urbanised catchment. We've got about 30,000 properties roughly in the floodplain. We've got a large biomedical and hospital precincts that can be flooded, and one of the fastest growing CBDs in Australia is at risk of flooding. So all of that with that flash flood risk means that heightens that risk to life. And finally, we did some engagement before we did the project, and we actually found out that a lot of the members of the public, the communities, had quite a low awareness of their flood risk. They didn't know where to go to get more flood information. Part of that was because we've got a quite transient population of renters. There's a lot of new properties being built all the time, but also we haven't had significant floods since 86, 88 and 91. Which means that a lot of that sort of community knowledge has been lost, and even then they're only a 1 in 100 flood. They cause quite significant damage. So there's some really key issues, and they underpin the work that we did on Flood Smart. We ended up giving ourselves 3 goals for the project that we wanted to think about all the way through to make sure that the system we developed gave us what we needed and was appropriate or fit for purpose. So the first one was increased lead time because of the flash flood risk. Not just the communities needed more time to react and be safe, but also our emergency response planners needed that longer lead time to be able to do anything appropriate in terms of getting volunteers on the ground, enacting flood plans. So that was really important. We also wanted an automated service. So that the part of the reason there was that we don't have hydrologists and modelers at council that were going to be available all the time to interpret models and look at graphs and make those big decisions and work the system. The same with our emergency response partners, because it's a flash flooding environment. They're not going to have time to sort of interpret what's going on before they issue alerts and warnings. On top of that, we wanted to build in like that, obviously increased lead time. So having an automated service helped mean that we could go all the way to an alert or a warning much quicker than we would if we had to do each part manually. And finally, we wanted an output, a tool that really simplified the data touched on it already, that there's not a lot of modelers and hydrologists going to be responding. So we wanted something that, you know, a high-level manager at council could look at and support that, understand what's going on in terms of the situational awareness of that flood event. But also New South Wales State Emergency Service, who are the main combat agency for flood in New South Wales, they use a lot of volunteers in their control rooms. So we wanted to make sure that they could look at our system and know what was going on and provide that support. So some quite tricky ones, but they really helped guide us. The system we came up with here is based on the Flash architecture, and it has kind of 4 key stages. First was the collection of data. We actually had quite a big challenge here with the river and rain gauges around the catchment. There's about 35, but they weren't all owned by council. There was 5 different agencies involved, so we wanted to collate all that data into one place to, you know, support decision making. We also brought in a cutting edge piece of forecasting product called Nowcast or Rainfields 3. That's produced by the Bureau of Meteorology, and that takes forecast data, catchment and regional forecast rainfall data, incorporates that with rain radar data and translates that into a 12-hour gridded rainfall forecast that's actually designed for flash flooding environments. That gave us a few problems as well, because that's at the time that wasn't even a release product, so we had to sort of work out how to use that and incorporate that into the system, but you know, really was key in helping give us that extra lead time that we wanted. All that data plus catchment information goes into the Nelen Schuurmans Lizard tool online portal, so that we can store it and further process it, because we put all of that information into a 3DI flood model, very much like a 2-flow model, it's like 1D, 2D elements to it, with gridded rainfall, and that's running all the time in Lizard. Every 30 minutes we get outputs from that, so that we can actually look at and what impacts we expect to happen in the catchment. So going from rainfall and river level and forecast to impacts. Then we wanted this simplified tool where we could actually show the outputs of that and translate that into like a situational severity. What's that flood going to look like? Where are the impacts going to happen? And for that, we created the FloodSmart Parramatta dashboard. This is an online portal for our emergency response partners, not members of the public, just partners. And this is something that they can look at on their phone, on their computer, on an iPad. So they can do it sat at home, or as generally happens during a flood event, all look at it together, but from different places, and have that single conversation about what the flood's going to happen. And that allowed us to have a single point of truth, but also really incorporate the visuals that we wanted as part of this project. And then finally, out of that system, we get our alerts and warnings. I'll touch on it a bit later in the project, in the presentation, but we've got a 2-stage alert and warning system that supports both types of our customers. Obviously, the system also has a review post-event, and we have a lot of community engagement around the system and stakeholder engagement as well to get that further feedback. I'm not going to touch on it too much in this project, but it is there part of this system. So I'm going to break it down into kind of 3 areas. Firstly, the data and the technical side of the system, and how we made some modifications to that underlying forecasting and modeling, so that we get, you know, that foundation of information that's appropriate to what we need to do. Then I'm going to look at the improvements we made, or the things that we did to focus on impact and situational awareness for the emergency managers and emergency responders, and then finally actions and communications around warnings and alerts that go out so that people take the appropriate action. So on the data and technical side, look, this is, I've said it already, but this is the foundation on which all our good forecast outputs are based, and the decisions we make are based. Technical leads and operational managers are really the customers here. And we need to know or understand how the data comes to be so that we can feel confident using it. The 3DI model is really the heartbeat of the system. It runs a full 12-hour forecast of what's predicted to happen every 30 minutes. The key there being that we didn't want to be waiting around for 2 hours to know whether anything had changed. 30 minutes, it gives us time to understand the situation and make decisions before new models coming in, and we always feel like we've got the most up-to-date data. On the dashboard, we actually even show when the last model was run so that you know when to wait for the next one. And we update the dashboard with recorded data every 5 minutes as well. That's really key for us, and that 3DI model is a really powerful tool when it's combined with interpolated forecast data. That forecast data that we're getting from the Bureau of Meteorology it comes to us as a suite of ensemble members. We've talked in a couple of presentations about ensemble members. I won't go into too much detail, but that's really important and key data. However, we realized early on that if we ran all those ensemble members, as you're meant to do, and produced all that information, we would not only impact on our increased lead time, but it'd also impact on the simplified outputs that we want to show people. So we did some research on some work early on into looking at a way to pick one of the ensemble members. So we look at the total catchment rainfall over the 12 periods, and then we pick currently the 50th percentile forecast ensemble member, and we use that to run through our model. We started off using the 75th percentile, then after a few events, we actually found that the 50th was more stable and gave us a better approximation to what we're seeing on the ground in general. Obviously that could change, but we're willing to accept that variability to be able to come up with a best guess of what was going to happen rather than the whole spread of potentials, which allows us in a really short amount of time to make a decision about which warnings are going to go out and take action. One of our key goals. And then finally, in that technical element, we realized after the first event that we had a ton of information going into the system. And if we wanted to know whether our system was working well and be able to explain that to our managers and look at where maybe areas we needed to improve, we needed to look at that post-event review. We needed a better way to do that. So we came up with a semi-automated sort of predefined output from our post-event review that looked at 3 key areas of the system. The first one is our flood model. Is that working well? So we took the recorded rainfall, interpolated it, ran it through the model, and then compared that with actual water levels at key locations for trigger level locations. If that looked good, tick, the model's working really well, or it may highlight areas where we need to improve that model. Great, also a good outcome. The second one was around the forecast ensemble members. So we look after the event, whether the 50th percentile is still working well in that event. I'm not going to go into the details of how we do that. It's probably a 2-hour presentation, and it wouldn't be me giving it. It would probably be someone from Nelen Schuurmans. But we look at that data, and that's how we moved from the 75th to the 50th percentile. And then finally, we look at the rest of the system. So did the model run in 30 minutes? Did the warnings go out in time? Did the trigger levels working, and did the rest of the system work well? And we get feedback from our partners on that, and that allows us to make improvements sort of on the more technical side. Next, we've got impact and situational awareness, where we're taking that data and we're trying to turn that into an understanding of impact and severity in the flood. Customers sort of change a bit here from the technical leads to emergency responders and management staff, because they need to know, what sort of actions they're starting to do, and get that situational awareness, not just for responding in the flood, but communications as well. So the key tool for us here is the dashboard. It's a single point of truth. At a glance, this is the main page, although there are other tabs that I'll just briefly touch on. This is the main page, and this tells us where the impacts are happening. Once a flood warning is issued, the system colours up. I didn't have a good example, but you get the idea, and it tells us which of those warning areas will be impacted and to what level. We can see things for each of the warning areas on the map. I say they colour. We can go in and have a look at those in more detail. On the left hand side, we get the data for each of the warning areas, the current level, the max forecast, what warnings or alerts have been issued, and then the other trigger levels. It's really key information. And at a glance, you can see what kind of events happening. If it's all minors, great, but if we're going into the orange and reds, the moderates and majors, that probably changes the type of action that our management staff will take. As you hover over any of those areas on the map, or click on any of the lines in the table, it actually takes you to the appropriate graph where you can get slightly more detailed information like this. This is kind of graph that you'll see. And this tries to give you that understanding of what's happened already and what we're predicted to happen. On the left-hand side, in the white area, you can see all the recorded data coming in from our gauges. And on the right-hand side, on the yellow and orange, past the now line, you can see all the forecast data. We've also got our minor, moderate, and major trigger lines that relate directly back to impacts, and our 1 in 20, 100 and PMF, so that you get that indication of what sort of severity of flood is as well. The key line here probably is the pink one or the purple one. That's our current forecast line. So once that breaches a trigger level, then our automatic alerts go out, and I'll talk about that a bit later. That's great information. You get to understand what we think now is the most likely outcome. However, after the first few events, we realized that, and actually it was picked up by Just in his previous presentation, it's really useful to know what the older forecasts were. So we actually, the black lines actually show the last 12 model runs, forecast runs that we've done, and as they get older, they get grayer, which kind of makes sense. So you get to get a feeling for how that event has developed, starting off with just low level rainfall in the distance. The last couple of model runs in the last couple of hours have shown big peaks that have issued trigger levels and alerts. And then the most recent forecast show, actually this forecast, it's the situation potentially is getting better. So maybe it's not going to be as bad as we thought. That really helps us if it's, it shows us if we've just got one complete outlier forecast, or let's say the trend's going up or coming down. We also show the flood model extents. I won't go too deep into this, but this can help emergency responders know where to send staff, whether somewhere they've got people on the ground that might flood. You can look at the water depths here. The forecast model runs in the future compared to design storms. We show the rainfall tab. Here we have on the left at the bottom the last hour's rainfall forecast from our Bureau of Meteorology, and then above it the rainfall forecast ensemble member that we're using. That gives you an indication of how that storm is progressing. Is it coming from the west, from the east? Like, what is it? Scattered showers is one big storm. Quite helpful. And then in the map in the middle, we actually look at the catchment level, what rainfall's already fallen. Look, you can change it to be the last hour, 3 hours, 6 hours, 12 hours. You can even change it to be the forecast, the next 3 hours forecast, 6 hours, 12 hours forecast as well. Or even look at the design storm one, which is the max 6 hours and 72. So you get a feel for rainfall wise, what type of event that was. Quite helpful for some of our responders. And then finally, we've got a tab that shows you what warnings have been issued. So you can keep tabs if the warnings have gone off. You can look back and see over the event and search and look at what warnings have come on and gone off. So going back to the dashboard, we see that as a really powerful tool mid-event for collaboration. We're all sitting there looking at the same data, all of the data in one place, and can have those important decisions. It even holds our emergency plans, so we can click on the tab and look at local flood plans and other documentation around flooding for our area. And we can even add messages. So for each of the warning areas, there's a little button that you can press, and maybe we say, look, the gauge is out here, and everyone of the users of the dashboard can see that note up on the screen. Really powerful tool. And then post-event, it's super powerful for gaining feedback on how that event went. Some people just take a picture of the screen and say, look, I didn't really understand this, or I want to improve this. And that's great for getting that post-event review. Finally, we've got actions and communications on warnings. And that's where we're turning impact and situational awareness into action. What do we want people to do, and when? Customers, the real focus of our customers here is the emergency responders and members of the public, but obviously anyone can get those alerts. So we have a two-phase alerting system, because we realized early on that our emergency response partners have very different needs to our members of the public. So we designed a system that works a bit like this. Firstly, as soon as a forecast breaches a trigger, up to 12 hours ahead, an automatic alert is sent out to all our partners. So that could be the police, could be the fire, could be our combat agency for flood, water companies, whoever's appropriate. And that says in an SMS or an email, look, go and look at the dashboard, because something's coming, something potentially is coming. There's a link in the email and the SMS to actually take you direct to the dashboard, so you don't have to faff around trying to find the link for it, or log in, or those sorts of things. Now, they don't mind that it's much lower confidence, because they've gained that lead time to be able to start gaining that situational awareness. It might be 2 in the morning, it goes off, they can get up, they can look at the system and start to prepare. If it's just a few minors, maybe it's a watching brief. If you're going straight into moderates and majors, then maybe they need to start calling on volunteers or start enacting flood plans. And it allows them to start at the earliest possible level to monitor the system and understand where we predict those impacts will be. One of the really powerful changes we learned from kind of a mistake early on. One of the first events we had, our system sent out like about 100 partner alerts, and no one really knew what alerts were in force or weren't. And when we looked at them, it's because our forecasts were sort of bobbling around trigger levels and going on, staying up and coming off. We made a change to the underlying system that meant that 2 forecasts had to breach a trigger level before going below it for that trigger and that automatic alert to be to go out to the partners. Now, we lost about 30 minutes lead time, but in the 12 hours that we gained from the system, we actually felt that was a good compromise, because it took out about 90% of not necessarily false alarms, but confusing alarms that were making it difficult for our partners to be certain about what was going on in the system, what to expect. So that was really powerful, really great improvement. One of the people that get those partner alerts is the Early Warning Network. So they're a company that run a 365, 24/7 control room that provides a service to other councils, businesses around extreme weather, not just flooding, but all sorts of extreme weather. They get our alert, our partner alert, and then they monitor our system. And at the 2 to 3 hour mark, when our rain radar becomes much more confident, higher confidence in it, then they'll make a decision. Look, is it a true warning, or if there's the system's broken for some reason, there's just something wrong with the model or a gauge or something like that, then they don't issue it. So we've just got that little check at that 2 to 3 hour mark. Then they issue the public warnings out to everyone that has signed up for them. Now, we've obviously reduced that lead time down from 12 to 2 to 3 hours, but that's still better than if we just issued it off rainfall. And that's the compromise there, is that we've got a much higher confidence that once those public warnings go out, those members of the public will see impacts in their area, so they'll believe those warnings going forward and have a better understanding of what they need to do. And finally, we wanted to make sure that the warnings that go out to the public help them understand that that warning was appropriate for them, and that they needed to at least keep aware of the situation, if not take action. So we wanted them to understand what their appropriate actions were. So rather than have one warning area for the whole of Parramatta, we split our risk areas up into 10 flood warning areas. Each of those has a similar flood risk profile. So it might be one whole creek is a warning area, or it might be on the bigger river that these areas flood from this situation, these similar levels, so they're in a warning area. And then members of the public sign up to the flood warning that's appropriate for their property or the bit they're interested in, basically. That allows them to know that it's not just a flood warning for Parramatta, that it's actually for them, and they are going to see flood impacts in their area. The next element of that is that we have minor, moderate, and major trigger levels for each of those warning areas, and bespoke messaging for each of those warning areas at those 3 levels. And before they sign up to the flood warning service, the members of the public have given the option to look at where their property is on our hazard mapping and find out if they're at high, medium, or low risk, so that in our warnings we can actually define a bit better whether that warning is appropriate for them in their community. So for instance, the minor flood warning you've got here, you can see it says that the high risk properties may experience flooding, but the medium and low risk are unlikely to. That might be that you're medium or low risk because your house is further up the hill. You're still getting that situational awareness that there's something happening in your community. You might want to move your car or take a different route to work or whatever it is, but something's going on, so that if it does worsen into a moderate or a major flood warning, you've gained extra lead time to know what to do. We also update the local area conditions for each of those messages to show that worsening improvement, the kind of things that you're likely to see in your area: roads shutting, which kind of areas might flood, and links to kind of other information and recommended actions. The members of the public get an SMS or an email or a voice message. The email gives them all the information you see here, and the SMS tells them the level and where it's going to flood and when, but also adds a link to get that full email message that you can see on the screen, because that includes a map which just re-emphasizes that it's for their location, and they can kind of pinpoint their property. Just another little element to help the residents. So look, hopefully, I can't imagine that all of those examples are relevant to your situation, the forecast service that you're developing or the warning service. But really what I wanted to do in this presentation was just get you thinking, like, how can I help tweak things to make things more relevant for, how can I think about the customers and make improvements to benefit them? And hopefully you can take something away from that. I've already picked up things from the last three presentations that have got me thinking about improvements that could be made. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks for the presentation, Chris, and yeah, kindly ask permission for all attendees to use a bit more time. So before lunch in European time, so we exceeded our time, but there are a few questions that I want to ask you, Chris. So one is from Jan. So he is curious, like now, I mean, this dashboard you visualized, you showed us. So you said you are using the median forecast. So he's just like asking if it's an option to show the extreme ones, and that's because that could give some more additional lead time that could be useful for emergency management planning for the partners you mentioned. So is there any plan for that?
Look at this. It has been discussed, and it's definitely possible to do that. We could run more models and show those on the graphs. I think at present it's not like a planned change, kind of for the reason I gave, that it then adds extra things to the graph to make it slightly less confident about what the outputs might be. I think then you add in a few other decision points there. Which one do you issue the warning from? Do you still use the median or the maximum, or higher and lower levels? So it's yeah, look, it's definitely something that share my webcam, sorry, something that can be done, but I think it needs thinking about and discussing with the users before we just introduce that.
Okay, thanks. Another question came from Jos, that you like in your presentation. So you mentioned the system includes a review module that can be activated after an event. So did you already use that component, and what was the value of that component for the further development of this system?
So the post-event review outputs, and yeah, the sort of semi-automated outputs that we got. Yeah, look, an intrinsic part of a total flood warning service is that you're always reviewing after every flood event the sorts of data that you're looking at. It's an ongoing iteration. I would say that after every significant event, we look again at the data that we need to review and make changes, because every flood's different, so it focuses our attention in a different direction. One of the most recent floods that we had was a much longer duration, actually a couple of weeks of just consistent rainfall that added lots of saturated catchment into the mix. Whereas quite often in my area, you get these high intense rainfall bursts, and that's what causes flooding. And it's certainly initially where we'd calibrated the model. So, in that review, we looked at that and were able to highlight changes, which I didn't go into this presentation, but probably could have done a whole presentation on around infiltration rates and how a more complicated infiltration layer in the model could change up when and how quickly water moved through the system and improve that. So we actually did a big piece of work earlier this year and made big improvements to the flood model for those sort of longer durations saturated catchment flood events. So always under review. And a lot of the feedback and changes we make come from feedback we get from users as well. So that's really good.